Parker Blake joins us on the show today, offensive line coach and enthusiast. He covers the Bengals and breaks down the NFL draft. He's here to talk about Seattle's offensive line struggles. Where do we go from here moving forward? This offseason, we're going to break down some prospects. We're going to talk about free agency. And we're also going to talk to him about what he feels like the state of this offensive line is currently. Some of the young guys he likes, Cross, Lucas, a lot of those developmental guys that were here last season that all got playing time, all got NFL experience. So we're going to break it down with Parker and get his thoughts on all of that coming up on the other side. But guys, if you've been watching the channel, you like what you're watching, go down, sub to the channel for us, like the videos, share the videos. It all helps with the channel. And you can also go down, buy us a coffee. That's another way to just support the channel. Also got the membership program that we kicked off too. So go down there, check that out. So we're going to waste no time here. On the other side, Parker Blake.
So y'all can sit here and ask me all the questions y'all want to.
Don't you ever talk about me.
Man, let's go. It's go time, baby.
I'm just about that action, boss.
You ready to go get it. You just like to do it.
That's what it is.
Defense trying to do that. Pass is caught back in. Can't chase. What a catch! Jackson Smith and Are you kidding me? Baldwin. Oh my goodness, he caught it.
This is the HawksZone Rundown with your hosts, Ryan and Bryce.
Today on the Hawks Zone, Parker Blake, offensive line coach and Bengals analysis, and covers the draft for the Bengals as well, joins us to talk a lot of O-line today because, you know, it's no secret that Seattle has been dealing with this issue for a long time now. So, and this offseason could be potentially the biggest for John Schneider as far as addressing that issue. So we got Parker on the show tonight to dive into that. Parker, appreciate you coming on the Hawks Zone, man, and chopping it up with us tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, man. Anytime I get to talk O-line, it's always a pleasure. Anytime I get to talk football, it's always a pleasure. But I actually really like the Seahawks, one of the closer teams to where I'm actually from, being more West Coast than East Coast, but being a Bengals fan. So I'm excited for it, man. I'm pumped.
That's awesome, man. Well, hey, let's dive right into it, man. Waste no time. No secret that we have had our issues with that line dating back for, I mean, you want to go back to a decade now. And it just doesn't get any better right now. We are having some problems. We got a little healthier with Abe Lucas coming back with our tackle spots, you know, and he finished off the year healthy, which is a really good sign for the Hawks. And you feel like, okay, with him and Cross, you sort of got your bookends. But man, that interior line has been an issue, and it was bad last year. And you know, the combination as well. And we'll get into coaching a little later because you know, obviously Ryan Grubb and Scott Huff are no longer with the Seattle Seahawks. So it's a new coaching staff too. We hired a new OC. So we have some developmental players that are on the roster currently, but what's your overall take, especially last year, that you've seen from Seattle, both positive and negative, with this offensive line?
Yeah, no, I think the biggest thing that I can appreciate about what they've done and how they've gone about kind of trying to construct this offensive line is they haven't been afraid to take shots. Like, it feels like they're trying to pick up one or two offensive linemen in the draft every year. I feel like they're not necessarily taking bad prospects, but I think what I don't like about their process has been, it feels like they're trying to be more conservative, right? They're not going for like maybe some of these more traitsy guys or some of these early round shots. They like guys on day 2 or later. They like guys that they might be outliers in size, but they have a good technical profile, or they might have all the size and traits and all of that stuff, but then they're very, very, very raw. And I think that's kind of the definition of the group right now, where you have guys that are like, oh, that guy's like a really good depth piece, but he's kind of competing for the one spot, opposed to having these guys with massive upside be able to compete for jobs. And so I like that they're still taking shots and they understand that it's an issue and they're trying to correct it. However, I think they need to be a little more aggressive in a couple of those shots every now and then.
Yeah. So with that, Parker, like, what prospects specifically that Seattle's taken in the last couple of drafts at the O-line have you really been impressed with, or like, for that matter, coming into the process? Like Christian Haynes, Lamea, Anthony Bradford, Olu Timmy, like, are some of those guys that you gravitated to when you were breaking down film of the offensive line prospects over the last couple draft classes?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Olu stood out, you know, being winning, you know, 15 awards his final year in college. I mean, just an absolute great, on paper profile as far as he had decent size. He had the accolades. It looked like it should have been a plug and play guy, but then, watch the film, looked like a day 3 guy, still looks like a day 3 guy. But then you have a guy in Christian Haynes who was more of a sleeper throughout the process. I was a huge fan of Haynes and just his upside, but the biggest thing with him is he needed to end up in a good system. He didn't have the best, ceiling as far as, his projection and pass protection, because I just a little light in the pants, little issues with play strength, but getting him in one of these zone schemes where you can kind of protect him with play action, get him moving side to side and let him be an athlete. That's really where he's going to succeed. And Lamea is, I think, kind of the exact opposite of that, where I think he's a little more stout, a little better in pass protection, anchors a lot better. He still generate a lot of movement in the run game, but he's not going to be as athletic side to side. At least that's what I thought going throughout the process. And I feel like he's kind of turned into a different player since getting to Seattle, but that's maybe a conversation for later. But it's kind of, I like, again, I was really big fan of Haynes, loved Cross, loved Lucas, actually big fan of both of them in their drafts. But then Olu, the film wasn't there for me. The accolades were, it was kind of a weird prospect. Laumea, I think, is a fine late round shot, but again, you're more bringing that guy in as a depth piece, even though it seemed like he was able to surpass that level of expectation and get some time, get some meaningful reps. But kind of, again, just a weird hodgepodge of guys where it's like, yeah, I like the ups and downs of some of these guys. They just don't really line up very well. So you end up with kind of a staggered offensive line room, which isn't great.
Yeah, you talk about, Haynes. We were pumped when they took him, right? We got him in the 3rd round. We thought, wow, we got this guy in the 3rd round. Like, here we go, a couple plug and play guys now. Murphy on the other side of the ball, right? But you get Haynes, so we were excited about it, and it just didn't happen last year. Do you think a lot of that was coming down to coaching? And do you think now that John Benton's coming in this building now, and they have a new coaching staff, and it's just so important, right? You're dealing with that offensive line, just 5 guys is one unit. And what do you take away from that? Because it feels like a lot of these guys kind of don't pan out here, a lot of the developmental guys, and a lot of it to me is coming down with coaching. What do you think of John Benton and what he could maybe get out of these developmental guys, like a guy like Christian Haynes? That's what we're kind of excited about as well. And we sort of were like that with Mike McDonald last season, with what can Mike get out of some of these guys on the defensive side of the ball that maybe other guys couldn't get out of, like a Reek Wolin or Kobe Bryant, for example, that really had a great year. So what's your take on that? Do you think a lot of it is some of the coaching and development that just Seattle just hasn't had in recent seasons?
Yeah, I know. I think it's a combination of things, because, like I said, a guy like Christian Haynes needed to be in more of a more specific situation, because he has a limited skill set. And that's where I'd like the Seahawks to go get these guys with kind of maybe a more broad range of skills that maybe they're just not as well developed all the way. But you can bring a guy in that's more of a Swiss Army knife and fit him into any scheme and develop him whatever way you want to. But when you keep taking swings on guys that are more of a specific type, in one way or another, you have to make sure their strengths align with what you're trying to do. You can't bring in guys for a certain scheme and then run a different scheme, obviously. But I think people would be surprised if they looked around the league and kind of saw the random assortment of players you see in some of these rooms. And that's where the offensive line, and I've said it for a long time, I think a lot of people have, is it's never been about putting the 5 best offensive linemen out there together, because you need guys that are going to be able to play well next to each other, that complement each other or can cover up each other's weaknesses. And that's what I think the Seahawks are missing, where they have a very specific style of prospect that I feel like they're going for, but they're not doing anything to compensate for their weaknesses. Because there's no such thing as a perfect prospect. I think we all know that. And so if you construct your offense a certain way, you should be able to hide the deficiencies in some of your players. That's what good coaching, good scheming is. And that's where I think you can say, yes, I think it's on coaching at that level, but it's also how much of that falls on the front office communicating with the coaching staff as far as what are we going to run, what pieces are we missing for that puzzle. That's where it's more of that kind of 2-sided system. Who actually has more say, how many conversations are actually being had, or is it the front office getting guys they like and telling the coaches to make it happen?
So, Parker, how would you fix Seattle's O-line? Do you think it's a complete overhaul situation? Like a lot of the Seahawks fans here think we need to gut it down to the studs and rebuild it, or do you think there's, with Abe Lucas, he is in a contract year. Charles Cross theoretically is, unless they pick up his 5th-year option. So if you were the GM in Seattle right now, would you be tearing it down to the studs? Are there pieces there that are workable with the John Benton and Clint Kubiak coming in that you think could potentially still work in Seattle?
I think you definitely need to hang on to Cross. I think he's been one of the more stable pieces for that group. I don't think there should be too much conversation as far as trying to move him, because I don't think you want to tear this thing down to the studs. It's not that bad. Coming from a Bengals fan, I've seen some bad offensive lines. I promise it's not that bad. But no, I think the best way to approach at least this offseason, and something that I've talked with a few guys about, is I think Abe Lucas is my biggest question mark, because if you can have the bookend solidified, you can feel good about just taking shots at the interior like they have been. But with Abe Lucas, his injury concerns, is struggling to get onto the field at times, and his shaky performances when he is on the field at times. It's like, what are you going to get out of him? And I think that's where I think the Seahawks are in a great spot this year, and it's a perfect draft for them to be in the spot where they need to go get a guy that can kind of be one of these flex guard tackles and put him in there and say, hey, we need an interior offensive lineman. Bring in a guy. Yeah, we feel confident that he can slot in there, but let's let him fail at tackle first. Let's let him go compete with Abe Lucas for that tackle spot. And if Lucas is able to win the job out, then we're better off for it, because he was the better guy. Now we can bump this guy onto the interior, where we do need, I think, a little bit more help than this tackle situation. And then as the season progresses, if Lucas goes down, again, in the contract years, is a great season to evaluate what you expect him to do long term. If he has injury issues again, you're able to bump this guy, maybe a rookie, back out there, fill in for that spot. He can take it over time. It's kind of like the similar plan to, but I think a lot of Bengals fans expected with the Trent Brown and Amarius Mims situation last year. Amarius Mims is a very raw prospect, great upside, but we didn't really know who he was going to be. You wanted to kind of give him some time to marinate in the system and learn what's going on. So they bring in a vet like Trent Brown, who maybe has some injury issues, some health issues. And once Trent Brown goes down, Mims slots in, and it ends up being a pretty smooth, and honestly, an upgrade over the course of the season. I think you kind of hope for something like that in a similar situation. And then obviously, I think you still need to take a late round swing on another interior guy, because I feel like you have a lot, kind of like the Bengals situation, where you have a lot of interior guys that are great depth pieces or 6th man, 7th man type guys, but they're not starting caliber players. And you need to find a way to either generate some competition in that room or bring in better talent.
So I got another question that kind of pivots off that too, Parker. Like, do you think the Clint Kubiak system, or the Shanahan system, however you want to classify it, do you think it'll be a better system for what Seattle currently has in place and the players they have, before we start talking about draft and free agency? Do you think that it fits the majority of the guys that are there, or do you think there are guys that are currently on Seattle's roster and under contract that won't really fit into this system too well?
I definitely think every team could afford to trim down a little bit, and they probably have a couple of players in there where, whether they came in and were different players than they expected, or carried over from a previous regime. I mean, there's always going to be players on your roster that are kind of those floaters. So you don't want to say that you have all the right pieces, but I do feel like they have the right mindset. That's where I feel like the coaching and the front office are on the same page. They just need to kind of have a better hit rate, where they're bringing the right profile in, I think, for the direction they're headed, especially now. But they just need to do a better job of, again, maybe not being so conservative and being like, oh, well, we want to make sure we don't miss, so we're okay with the single. Like, try and load that bat up, go swing for some doubles, some triples. Maybe you'll hit the big one. But you gotta take some risk every now and then. But I do like the profiles. Again, you have guys like Christian Haynes. You have a guy like Olu Timi, who was a very versatile center at Michigan. You have a guy like Satoa Lamea, who I think has come a long way since even when I saw him at the Senior Bowl. I feel like he had a huge rookie year in the NFL. And so I'm really excited to see what they're able to do with this room, but you have to figure out the right tackle situation. And I think, again, you just have to keep adding talent to this interior.
Yeah, I mean, the nice thing about it also, you had an undrafted guy in Jalen Sundell that had a cup of coffee late in the season and looked good too. The nice thing about it is all these guys got some reps last year, right? You had all those guys. Jarrell had to, emergency situations, but they at least they got some NFL experience. So now, if, like you said, we keep adding to that room, whether it's through the draft or free agency, these guys got another year of NFL experience. They played in NFL games. So that is promising to me as well. But, switching over to the draft, what do you think Seattle's strategy is going into this draft? You know, there's going to be the one room of fans that say, well, no matter what, you're drafting an O lineman first round with our pick, right? And then there's others that say, well, wait a second, you have some guys that are developmental guys already in your system. We could use that pick to fill other needs, and like you said, get some guys later in the draft. You know, and obviously free agency is going to determine some of that as well, right? But what do you think? Who do you like in this draft for O-line for Seattle, and where do you see them taking an O-lineman with the first pick?
I mean, I think valuing draft picks is interesting, especially this year, because even the quarterbacks in this group, you don't know where they're going to land. I actually keep saying I hope Seattle ends up with Dart. I don't know how you guys feel about that.
No, I love Jackson. I love Jackson Dart. I said, you know what? I think you got to take him at 18 though.
That's what I've been saying. I'm like, I'm okay. You take him in the first round because that way you at least get him for cheap for an extra year, right? You get that 5th year.
Yeah.
I know it's like maybe he's not a first round talent in whoever's mind, but with a quarterback, you want that extra year, no matter how you think the talent is. And I think he's a great little project that's not going to be too expensive and too tenuous that you can bring in. But I think there's a lot. I think the value of this offensive line group, I mean, I've been wrapping it up for the whole cycle this week. But I think the real value in it is in day 2 or like mid to late day 3, where it's like there's just the stagger and the drop off in some of these tiers. Like I think there's a few first round guys, but I think they're going to go earlier just because of the value, because there's not that talent later on, and there are some severe drop offs as we go down. You know, start getting later into the draft, and so I think go get your Dart in the first, and that's okay. I think fans are going to freak out about that, but that's how it goes. That's going to be the smart move long term. Then go invest. Go get one offensive lineman on day 2. Go get one offensive lineman on day 3. Even if it's in like the 6th, 7th, like the back half of the day 3, that's okay. There's going to be some good talent. And again, you're stacking not only just accumulating talent in this offensive line room, but like you said, you're stacking experience, because with injuries and with kind of these guys being at similar levels, they're all getting reps. They're all getting playing time. They're all growing and learning together. So like I said earlier, you don't really need the best 5. You need the 5 that know each other the best or work the best together. And this is how you develop an offensive line room that might not be a bunch of all pros, but they're going to go out there and they're going to put very quality performances back to back to back, kind of like we've seen flashes up from the Colts, like we've seen from the Broncos, where it's maybe, you have one guy or 2 guys, but even if you pull that guy out, it's really not an impressive group. And so, but it's the experience, it's the chemistry, and it's all putting that together over time. And so I think you just got to be patient with Dart, be patient with your O-line. I think you're really happy in 3 years.
Yeah, no, I've been very high on Dart. There's things about it where I go, oh, are we really actually going to go that way? Like, is that actually a possibility that John Schneider will pull the trigger? There's a couple other guys, like if Seattle quarterback wise took later on in McCord or Tyler Shuck, that I'd be okay with as well. But when you talk about those guys in that 2nd to 3rd round or second, day 2 picks, Parker, who are some guys that stand out to you that would be options you think that would fit in Kubiak's scheme and for Seattle?
Yeah, no, I'd love, and it's weird again, because you have to decide where you value these guys. But I think one of the more quiet groups of this class that is very underwhelming, but this center class, some of this top end center talent, it can be very flexible. They have good size, and they can play. I think they can flex center to guard, and so I think you can get some pretty good talent that's going to just slide down the board because it's labeled as a center that you can really get a valuable flex piece out of. I mean, guys like Jared Wilson, guys like Jake Majors, who some guys might have as day 3, some guys might have as day 2, depending on how you see them. But I think those are great guys to keep an eye on, because they're going to get lost behind the Wyatt Milums, the Gray Zables, that people are really projecting this huge tackle to even center move for these guys to the next level. That's not as smooth as people make it seem. And so you can go get a guy out there with center experience, and it's an easier transition from center to guard than it is even from tackle to guard, I'd say. And so you can go get this guy that has true flexibility for you, and have guys like Oluwatimi and Jared Wilson, for example, or like I said, Jake Majors, who have experience not only in big games, but at multiple positions. And really, again, bring in some solid talent to this group. But then obviously you got to love guys, the standard flex guys like a Donovan Jackson. We talked about guard tackle flex. I mean, that's a great guy to go gut him day 2. It's throw in there and say, hey, we don't know what you're going to play, but come in here and show us what you're good at. And personally, I see him as more of a guard, but we've seen him play tackle, and I thought he did it at a very good level. Personally, just to throw it out there, I would avoid a Charles Grant if I'm the Seahawks. I don't love what he would necessarily. I don't think he brings anything too different or valuable to the room. I think he's kind of a guy in that same talent range, if not like kind of a lesser end of that room, who doesn't have a lot of experience, is coming from a lower level school to the big leagues. Like there's a lot of transition he's going to have to go through, and I wouldn't really go on a guy like that.
So the one name that, everyone in Seattle's kind of been enamored with since the Senior Bowl is Gray Zabel. And there's a lot of people that want to take him at 18, and they think that's the way to go. The other name that's been really floating around in Seattle when you talk about that versatility of a tackle guard is, where is he here? Armand Membo.
Oh, yeah.
Membu. What are your thoughts on those two prospects? Because there are a lot of the names right now that people are talking about for Seattle at 18 potentially.
I see Zabel as a guard only, and I just think he struggled a lot as a center down in Mobile at the Senior Bowl. I thought there was a lot of hype that came out on social media and on TV, but I don't know. When I was down there watching the reps, I just didn't love what I saw. But maybe he can come into it. Obviously, that was like some of his first reps ever playing center, so I'm not saying he can't learn it, but I just think, again, you're kind of going for that learning curve opposed to getting guys that there's good talent that already knows that spot, and you have good guys in the room that know that spot. So Membu, again, it's always worrisome to transition a guy from a tackle to even being a five position guy. But I think if there's a guy in this class that's going to be able to do it, especially in Seattle, I think Membu would be a great fit because you can try him out at multiple positions, and again, another guy you can bring into the room and just say, hey, we don't know what you're going to play. Come in here, rotate around the line, see where you fit, see who you work well with, and we'll just let you land wherever you land. And I think that's, again, what they kind of need right now.
Yeah, no, it's going to be interesting, man. I think with Schneider, it's always a crapshoot. What is he going to do with the picks? We've sticked and picked the last two seasons, and he's had that history of trading down. So, I mean, we'll see. We might not even stay at that pick. It all depends. I think free agency is gonna play a role too. You look at free agency. John is not historically a big spender in free agency. A couple seasons ago, we made a splash for Draymond Jones, and that hasn't worked out. And the reason that's scary is because you think, now this guy might get gun shy again for, trying to make another splash. There are some guys out there, and you look at Kubiak's system, he really relies on that center spot. We've talked about Olu and some of the young guys there. Do you think that's an upgrade that might be on the top of the list during free agency here? There's a couple of guys that are available that could be a nice fit here. But what is your thought? Do you think John's going to dress it, or do you think he's going to kind of bargain hunt like he's done, with the Lake and Tomlinsons and guys like that? Or do you think he's going to say, you know what, I'm feeling the pressure. I think, I am on the hot seat a little bit, sizzling. At least I can say, hey, I went out, I made a splash. Not a Trey Smith kind of guy, but, at least I went out in day one and maybe made a move. Do you see him making a move, or do you kind of see maybe business as usual and we'll just kind of add here and add there with that offensive line? What do you think? What do you think John Schneider might do here, free agency wise?
I think as far, again, like we talked about, as far as building what you're going for, bring in an experienced veteran, like a free agent ad, I think is a fun move. I think fans get excited for those. But when you look at the value that's actually on the market, we're looking. So again, for a guard tackle flex guy, I don't think the market's great for that in free agency, especially compared to the draft. If you're comparing them side by side, so it's like, oh well, we can draft that guy. We don't even know where he's going to land. No reason to pay a guy what might be top dollar for at least his market when we can go get a guy on a rookie deal, especially on day 2 or day 3, to fill the same role. But then if you look again for interior guys, I just don't. Again, being a Bengals guy, looking at this interior offensive line market, if you're not getting a Trey Smith because you don't think you're a Trey Smith away from being a very serious contender, then I don't know what you're necessarily going for in this draft. And that's where with Seattle, I feel really good about the composition and age of this offensive line room. It's just about adding some more younger pieces to build that chemistry and develop something. Sometimes things take time, and that's okay. Sometimes things take a little bit of time. We have to be okay with that, because I don't know if injecting even if it's like a Tevin Jenkins out of Chicago who's got the injury history and can he stay on the field? Like, what does bringing him into the room necessarily do for you? Is that just a transition guy? Do you really think he's that big of an upgrade? I mean, if you do, that's great. But then again, look at the market. He's going to be a lot more expensive than I think he's worth. And so are you signing this guy just to sign him? Because I don't personally think the Seahawks are a guard or a swing tackle away from, really elevating their game. But I do think if they commit to this youth movement in the offensive line room, it'll really pay dividends down the road when they have multiple guys, kind of like the Chiefs look like on their interior, at least or the Eagles do with these guys kind of just stepping up and taking over roles as some of these older guys age out. Like that's the situation you want to be in, where you're struggling. Like, oh, I don't know if we can pay all 5 of our offensive linemen because they're all just that good. Like that's where everyone wants to be. I think you're on that path. Just take some more aggressive swings in the draft and you're there. I don't think allocating resources as financially to your offensive line is the solution. I think you save that and you start paying some of these other positions that you're kind of on the fence with.
The one thing for me is I've kind of been of the mindset with this draft class in a way, and this free agency class. Like, there's guys in the free agency class where I go, yeah, you could go out. They're young still, like a Will Fries from the Colts. He's only 27. He is coming off a pretty significant injury when he broke his tibia last year. But he'd be a guy that, if they were going to take a swing, yeah, there's some upside there that you could take a swing at. The thing I don't want to see Seattle do is I don't want to see Seattle go and do the Lincoln Tomlinson deal or the Luke Jokel deal or these deals where it's like you're not actually going and trying to take a swing. Like, I'm so for going in the draft and being aggressive, but you also need to have some stability on that line. And that's where, for me, I think if you were to bring in someone to compete with Olu, because I look at Olu in a way, last year he was in year 2 and coming out of camp where he was getting a majority of the reps. Nick Harris was pushing him to start. Then they bring in Connor Williams. Then they turn back to Olu after Connor decides to retire. And it's just, to me, I just look at Olu and I go, with this Kubiak offense and the way they work, the center's got to make all the calls. I would like to see a veteran there, like a Drew Dahlman. If I was going to spend money, it'd probably be on Drew Dahlman as my center. And then I would be okay. Like, okay, if we're going to go in the draft, then we're going to go get some young guards that, have versatility. They can play tackle or guard. It's just, for me, I worry that the way that Seattle has addressed their O-line in the past, it's been 10 years plus for us of this, hey, we're trying to do this youth movement. We're trying to do it. And it's never panned out. And that's where I'm hoping, obviously, the new coaching staff and the way they've committed to the O-line with the hires pays some dividends in evaluating talent. But I would like to see them actually take a swing at an established starter to come in here and actually kind of anchor some of this O-line away from it being on Cross and Lucas as your bookends to be the only guys.
I think a great example of a team going with that approach is the Carolina Panthers because they brought in a bunch of that young talent over the course of like 3 to 4 years, but it just wasn't working out. They just had guys that just weren't making the jump or were just struggling because they were all so young. Not everybody can take the Packers route where you just, throw in as many young guys as you can and then luckily it lands. Sometimes you have the Panther situation where you bring in a lot of talent that you feel really good about, but again, it's just a bunch of young talent playing together, and that's not ideal for, success or really development either. So they brought in a couple, more veteran guards, but again, I think they brought them in on much more manageable deals. I just worry about what a contract looks like for the level of player that you're looking for in this market, where I think you're going to overpay for a guy again like Jenkins or a guy like Fries or Freeze who have the injury history. You don't really know what you're getting. You hope you know what you're getting and you like what they've done, but you don't really know what you're just bringing more question marks into the room. That's, I guess, the give and take, where again, if you think you're close and you think, okay, we'll bring in a couple of these pieces, we'll be competitive, we can see the light for the next, couple of years, we'll sign these guys to 3-year deals, and we'll just, keep trying to reload behind them. And that's a great plan, but how much are you going to invest into that? Maybe the new TV deal gets you excited and you want to just pre-spend some of that money. I'm totally okay with that if you can kick the can down the road. I just worry that you don't know what you're getting with anything you buy in this class, including a Trey Smith with the price tag he's going to come with.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that, you brought up a good point about, where do you are you close? You feel like you're close. And I think that's the question. Like, where, because I feel like John's in a weird situation, right? Like you sign Mike McDonald to 6-year deal, but you look at John and sort of the like just the pressure of him to just get this O line right, and but he's always a guy sort of like, I'm going to retool. We're not rebuilding, we're retooling, and that's why you see like these Lake and Tomlinson come up. We'll plug him in. And I agree, though. I don't want anybody right now with an injury history. Like we did that with Connor Williams, and what a disaster that was. But again, it was like, if all these things work, we could have a decent O line, right? If Connor gets back to form, if Lakin plays solid, if Abe's healthy, which he came back and he finished a year healthy, so that's a positive. And what you touched on, the two bookends, there's a lot of positive, and I like what you're saying. Like, I like the developmental guys. But again, it's going to come down to like, how close does John feel this team is, and a lot of it is the quarterback situation. A lot of people are saying, well, we don't know how good Geno could be because of our offensive line. And so that debate has now dragged on for, if he's back, that's going to be season 4 for Geno Smith, where we didn't think he'd be our starter for 4 seasons. At least I didn't, right? So at least you thought there was going to be a plan. And right now there isn't one. So it's a tough situation. Like, you have a lot of talent on this team. So it comes down to where they feel they are. But I think, yeah, it'll be interesting with free agency to just kind of see what he does. Day one for us is going to be, get your popcorn out and see what he does. Because if he makes a move, then you kind of know, hey, they're going to go for it. And Mike, bringing in Clint Kubiak, obviously the nice thing is they weren't satisfied with their OC. And they said, no, you're one and done. You're out the door. Like, we think we're better than this. We really do. So I sort of lean more towards like, they do feel they're just maybe a couple pieces away, but keep adding depth. I agree. Keep bringing in draft picks. But yeah, I don't want to see these last minute signings like Connor Williams and Lakin. I think, he's got to do something other than that. So yeah, we'll see. It's an interesting take, and your take, and it's interesting what they're going to do in draft, because your take with Dart, a lot of guys are thinking that he won't last if we don't pick him in 18. If he's on John's radar, he'll be gone. So you're not going to get him in your next pick. So you might have to reach, right, if that's your guy. So it's going to be interesting.
Well, the thing is, if he doesn't hit, then maybe you are in a teardown situation. That's where it's so interesting, because I think there's a lot of different fun stages of team building, and you kind of got to know where you're at, where you want to be. And I've always been a big advocate of teams need to lean more into the suck when they are in the suck, and just, be willing to sell things off and tear things down to the studs and start it back over, even though that could be a hard bullet to bite. But I don't think the Seahawks are that far away. That's where I don't think they're, an offensive lineman away from making a deep playoff run, but I also don't think they're not a couple pieces away from being a really solid contender, especially the way the division looks for them year after year, the way we're going. I mean, they're turning into one of the better teams in the division. They've been one of the better teams in the division, in my opinion. They just got to get a couple things to stick together. So again, it is all about where you see your team and what you think you can bring in. You just brought up a trade down earlier. Maybe trading out of the first round, you're okay with not getting a Dart because you're going to add a bunch of other younger pieces, so you can, again, proceed with the youth. Developmental guys are fun until they stay developmental guys, right? If these developmental guys aren't turning it over, then I think it's more of a coaching issue, and that's something you get into after a couple of years, a few years of a regime.
So, Parker, I'm going to ask you this kind of in the last few minutes here, but in your view, from being outside of Seattle, what would you think a successful offseason for the Seahawks would look like? What would it look like from free agency to the draft, and just kind of give us your view from a third outside the box of Seattle window?
I think as a Seattle Seahawk, fan, you're hoping to see at least an answer at quarterback, or for the quarterback situation, for like the next 3 years. It doesn't have to be what's the next 5 years at quarterback, 6, 7 years at quarterback look like for us, but hey, what are the next 3 years look like? Are we going to go with the young guy and just have to ride this wave? Are we keeping a vet and bringing in a young guy? So we're kind of looking at a 3-year transition period. Are we bringing in a free agent quarterback and kind of switching direction, but still trying to be competitive? And I think along with that, you hope to see kind of some answers with some of these players that are coming up, maybe not this year or the next year, but again, that same window, that 3-year window, who do we see as the cornerstones of this franchise? Who are we going to keep long term? Because I just think right now in Seattle, there's just a bunch of question marks. Like, I don't know where player X, Y, or Z is going to be in 3 years, and I think that's a bad spot to be if you consider yourself a contender. So again, I think coming out of this, those answers I want to see, but I think the flip of that is, hey, if we're just leaning into this rebuild, let's just shed the weight now, try and get some value out of some of the pieces we have, and just rip the Band-Aid off and go with it. So I think if anything at a high level, you're looking for one direction or another that way, at least.
I brought up, a lot and many times, and people in Seattle, we're in that spot where we've been middling for so long, like the 9 and 8 and the 8 and 9s, and we're right there, and that's what kind of keeps you like, hey, we're just a couple pieces away. You talk to people even last season, and they say, look, you start breaking it down, and you start trying to convince yourself, right? Like, well, you know what? We should have beat New York. We should have beat that. So there's a win. We should have beat LA when they came in our house. We're an 11-win team. No, we're a 12-win team, right? And then they forget that the 10th win, we barely beat a team of backups with the LA Rams, right? So to me, it's like, look, you are what your record is. You can try to convince yourself, but that's what people do, and is John Schneider doing that? So that's what you have to look at, because he could sit there and think the same way, man. We're a competitive team in his eyes, and we're a piece here and a piece there away. And you look at that and say, yeah, we could have beat the Giants. We're a 12-win team. Our division's not that good. San Francisco's kind of going the other direction. It's up for grabs, but that's fine. But if the division's fine, but if you're not a team that compete, we saw last year the teams that kicked us around that were a lot better than us. The Buffaloes, the Green Bays. So I don't know, man. I agree. There's question marks. The O-line, obviously, a huge question mark. Quarterback, long term. And I feel, and Bryce and I have talked about, we don't have a game record on that D-line either right now. You got some solid guys, your Derek Halls, the Maffe's, but where's your game record, right? And Leonard Williams, nice in the interior there, but he's going to get older. So we got nice pieces. That's the thing with this team. They're probably going to extend DK Metcalf. So that's not breaking it down to the stud. So I think he's leaning more towards pieces, but do you get the right pieces? Because again, we talked about he didn't have a great offseason signing free agents last year. He does good midseason, right? Ernest Jones, Leonard Williams. He manages to do those ones, but I don't know. So I think this is just a really important offseason for Schneider to not have to make a lot of moves, but the ones he does, like they got to be right.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. I just love like what they have going on with their roster, because you have so many different directions you can go. That's where those can be some of the hardest off seasons, because no one's going to think that they went the right direction unless they went the direction they thought they should go. And that's where when you don't have really a two-way off season, like a lot of teams end up in a lot of years, then it can be almost harder as a fan, where you're like, oh, well, this option could be fun, but that option also sounds fun. Because I mean, there's a number of ways you can go. I mean, you can even try and split your offseason up, and maybe you try and pay some players on one side of the ball or the other, and then you draft the other side. But again, we brought up trade downs earlier. If you trade out of this 18th pick, I think you can get some really legit value, because at least on my big board right now, I'm probably going to end with like 14 to 17 true first round grades in this class. And so that 18 spot, you're going to have a player that slid, and there's going to be a team that wants to come up and go grab that guy, no matter who it's going to be at that point. And trading back and getting defensive and offensive line talent on day 2 of this class with some extra, capital you're able to acquire that way, and then going and paying some of these guys. Again, maybe it's you pay the free agent quarterback and you go draft a guy like Shuck in the second or third, day 2, day 3 of the draft, and you bring in a lot of trench talent, build your roster from the inside out, and just say, hey, we're just going to retool this thing across the board. We might only be a piece or two away, but we couldn't tell you where that piece or two is. So we're just going to start accumulating good football players and see what happens. Hopefully good things happen. And that's again, it's just one of the many possibilities, but it's just really fun to look at this roster. I don't really think there's too many wrong paths to go down. I think the worst path you could go down is coming in with a very similar roster you had last year. I think you need to bring in 2 or 3 starters in 2025 that weren't starters, whether they're internal or external, for the Seahawks in 2024. And that's where I think you're going to see the biggest return.
Yeah, great points. This has been awesome, man. Awesome conversation, picking apart the O-line. Yeah, great stuff. Parker, before we get you out of here, why don't you let everybody know what you got going on and where everybody can find you?
For sure, yeah. If you're interested in anything that I do, say, or think, then just go to my Twitter or X at ParkerBlake60. I post everything that I do anywhere I do it to that profile because I like hopping around from project to project and collaborating with a bunch of different people. So I try and just publish everything there. I've started a TikTok recently, trying to figure out how all of that works. I dabble in my own YouTube stuff every now and then, just like I said, stuff all over the place. So if you just go follow me, I'll post everything there. You can also subscribe to me on Twitter. A lot of my heavier draft analysis goes to my subscribers. I post every time I update, whether it's my positional rankings or my overall big board for the draft. I post it to my subscribers first because I try to release, kind of just my top 100 at the end of the cycle once it's all wrapped up and official and pretty looking. But I post clips, rankings, have some good conversations about a bunch of random football stuff, all for that too. So if you're interested in any of that, but yeah, that's me. And thanks for the opportunity. It was fun chatting with you guys. Always fun to talk O-line and always fun to talk about some of these different teams and really dive into their situation. I feel like I've been researching the Seahawks roster for a couple of weeks now, just talking to a couple of different guys. And it's been really fun for me to get out of my zone and do some of that. So thank you guys.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And hey, we'd love to have you on again, maybe when the dust settles and free agency's over, the draft's over, and kind of seeing what this roster's looking like, closer to camp here. And maybe we can kind of talk about some stuff. So we'd love to have you back. And yeah, man, good stuff.
Awesome, for sure.
Thanks, Parker.
Thanks, Parker. Guys, that was Parker Blake joining us on the show, talking O-line. I know you guys have been, it's questions for everybody, and no bigger offseason than right now to start talking O-line. So it was awesome having Parker on. He's an offensive line coach. He knows the position through and through, and he had some interesting insights with this Seattle O-line.
Yeah, no, he really did. And what was great about it was he was able to come at this from a neutral perspective, being a Bengals, source, basically. His whole background is with Cincinnati and the O-line, but he gave us some really good insight to the guys we have on this roster.
Yeah.
And guys maybe we don't need to give up on just yet. And then he also was able to kind of give us some ideas of guys that they could look at and kind of maybe a draft situation where you do take a quarterback of all things at 18. So you get that extra year, that 5th-year option, and you take a guy like Jackson Dart, and there's still value potentially in rounds 2 and 3 to get starting caliber O-linemen. Now, I know most people won't like that philosophy. It does scare me a little bit going that way. But the other thing that was interesting was how he talked about this free agency class.
Yeah, no, the free agents. Yeah, because I think, and you and me have talked about it, right? But he's saying, hey, man, you just can't throw guys at the line and expect it. And we know that. We've talked about it. So it's another thought. It's another way to look at it. And because he's right? You talk about a line has to grow together. So I think we just want to see them do both. And he mentioned that too. Like, hey, do both. But and that's why I said, hey, there's a couple things he's got to address, but you got to hit on them, right? And it goes both ways, whether it's the draft picks or it's your free agent signing, right? If you are going to bring in a veteran center, it's got to work, because I think he's had a lot of things that haven't worked. And man, I do have a feeling that his seat's getting warmer and warmer, and this is a big deal for John this offseason. It really is.
No, it really is. And, when we kind of look at where this team could go, it was kind of interesting to hear Parker say, like, you kind of are in this stuck point where you're not to the point of tearing it down to the studs, but you're also not a Trey Smith away from being a true Super Bowl contender.
Right.
Seattle might be 2 or 3 years away from still being a true Super Bowl contender, but I think they're closer to being a potential playoff winning team where they're going to win, get to the divisional round, maybe be more of a divisional round at high a conference championship game contender in the next year or two than they are to the Super Bowl. But you never know. Things can break your way, and you may hit on a couple wicked players in the draft and get a free agent that, maybe they get a Drew Dahlman or a Tevin Jenkins, and they light it up here in Seattle and everything's good. And all of a sudden we've accelerated that plan. But you got to start taking some aggressive swings. And like Parker alluded to, they need to be aggressive. They keep looking for a certain type. Sometimes you just got to take a swing at a guy that has some of these, elite intangibles and maybe has some issues somewhere else that you can work on when you get them into your building.
Yeah, and honestly, I think if Ryan Grubb was still here, I'd be a little more hesitant about, well, let's just let these guys develop and another year of developmental players and bringing some more younger guys underneath them. But I do think with Kubiak, with John Benton now, that it's still a wait and see approach, but you're a little more confident that, like, what, we got to see guys on the field last year. They all got playing time. They all got NFL experience. Now with this new coaching staff, maybe it could elevate them to that next level of development, because like Parker said, it's great to have developmental guys, but you don't want just to be developmental guys for the rest of their career. So that'll be kind of interesting and cool to see. And yeah, you know what, bring in guys, just address it, let's get it right. And I do still want to see them. We talk about free agency and Christmas. We want to be running down the stairs in day one, and I think we want to hear you and me want to hear an offensive lineman getting signed. And that's what I feel. So we'll see. But awesome having Parker on, man. It was great, guys. Go over to his X Twitter. It's his stuff. We're gonna post it in the description below. So we go down there, follow him on X, and he's doing a few other things too on a couple other platforms. So, but once you get on there with him, you'll be able to find all his stuff. So awesome stuff, especially if you want to, get into O-line. So yeah, guys. And if you are watching the channel, make sure you go sub, like, share the videos. All that helps. So any final thoughts, Bryce?
Yeah. And don't forget, guys, you can find our work now on Field Goals. It'll be posted up there as well, now that we have kind of partnered up there with Mookie Alexander and the rest of that Field Goals crew. You'll be able to find this and our other content that we have coming out there. And don't forget about our membership program that is now available. So,
right. Yeah, guys, go down there. Yeah, guys, go down there, check out the membership stuff. All the details are down there as well. So that's it for us tonight. We got some other cool shows coming up. We got Jackson Bevins coming up later in the week too, so you're not going to want to miss that. So that's it for us. Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.